All right, today we're diving into a powerful new framework that claims to have found the literal physics of productivity. It's called the K equation, and if it's right, it means pretty much everything we believe about work is, well, it's just wrong.
You know that feeling, right? You put in 8, maybe 10 hours. Your day is a blur of emails, Slack messages, meetings. You feel completely drained. But when you look back, you realize your most important work hasn't moved forward one single inch. What if that wasn't just a feeling? What if it was a predictable, even mathematical event?
So the core argument here is that our entire economic system is built on a very old, very outdated idea from the industrial age. We call it the hourly fallacy. It's the belief that the hours you put in directly equal the value you create. Now that works fine for an assembly line, but for the kind of thinking work most of us do today, it's a catastrophic miscalculation.
Okay, let's get into it. To really grasp these new physics of productivity, we have to start with the biological price we pay for the way we work right now. See, the whole myth of multitasking has a cost, and it's a neurological one, rooted in decades of solid research.
And you know, this isn't some brand new idea. It actually builds on the foundational work of pioneers like the psychologist Sophie Leroy and researcher Joshua Rubinstein. Back in 2009, Leroy proved that when we switch from one task to another, our brain doesn't make a clean break. A piece of our attention, this attentional residue, gets left behind, and it seriously degrades our ability to perform on the new task.
Franklin Kimtai, the investigator who put together the K equation, gives this phenomenon a very physical name. He calls it scaffold collapse theory. The idea is that when you're deep in a complex problem, your brain builds this incredibly fragile mental structure, a scaffold, to hold all the moving parts. But an interruption, that little ping from your phone or a quick email check, it doesn't just pause your work. It acts like a wrecking ball, demolishing the entire scaffold and forcing you to rebuild it from the ground up. So, if every single interruption triggers a scaffold collapse, can we actually measure the damage? Well, the K equation argues that, yes, we can. And we can do it with terrifying precision. This is where Kimtai's work shifts from psychology into the hard numbers of economics.
And this brings us to a variable called delta. This little symbol represents the true cost of an interruption. It isn't just the 2 minutes the distraction took. No, it's the additional time you need to recover and completely rebuild that mental scaffold. Just think of it like a hidden tax on every single time you switch your attention.
And here's where the math gets brutal. For really complex, what they call K=3 work, think designing software architecture or mapping out a business strategy, the research finds that delta can be as high as 4.0. This means a simple 15-minute interruption doesn't cost you 15 minutes. It costs you an entire hour of productive output. Let that sink in for a second. One quick interruption, 1 full hour of your best work, just gone.
Okay, but let's flip this around. If distraction has such a punishing, measurable cost, then focus has to have an equally powerful and, frankly, exponential benefit. This is the real engine behind the K equation.
This analogy is such a powerful way to think about it. The equation basically treats your productivity like an electrical circuit. And this is where Kimtai brilliantly synthesizes the work of another giant in this field, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the father of the flow state. The variable C, for concentration, is pretty much the mathematical measure of that total immersion. And just like in physics, its effect isn't a straight line, it's a power law.
And this is exactly where our intuition completely fails us. We think, okay, if my focus drops a little bit, my output will drop a little bit. Makes sense, right? Wrong. The K equation proves that for complex work, a small drop in focus doesn't cause a dip, it causes a catastrophic collapse in your output. They call this the heuristic gap, and it is a truly terrifying reality of cognitive work. Just a 20% drop in your concentration can lead to a nearly 50% loss of a substantial outcome. So why? Why does this happen? Well, because in complex work, focus isn't an ingredient you add, it's an exponent. Losing just a little bit of it doesn't just slow you down, it breaks the entire mental web you need to actually solve the problem.
Okay, so we've got these two huge forces at play. The punishing cost of distraction, which is delta, and the exponential power of focus, which is c to the power of k. The fact that this massive heuristic gap exists demands a completely new model. So now, let's see how all these forces get synthesized into one single, unified formula.
So how do you build this thing? Well, it's actually pretty logical when you break it down. You start with the ideal scenario where your substantial outcome, S, equals your goal, G.
Simple enough. Then you have to subtract the time you lost, and remember, that's not just the distraction itself, but that time multiplied by the delta penalty. And finally, you take that new effective amount of time and multiply it by the exponential force of your concentration.
And there it is, the K equation. This is the synthesis of everything we've been talking about. It's the potential of your goal minus the tax of distraction, all amplified by the superpower of focus. It might look a little complicated, but every single variable in there represents a real biological and economic force we've just discussed.
Okay, let's quickly unpack what all these letters actually mean. G is your goal. That's the ceiling of what's even possible. Delta is that scaffold collapsing switching tax we talked about. C is your concentration, the fuel for your cognitive engine. And K is the complexity, kind of like the gravity of the problem you're trying to solve.
So the big question for you is, what kind of work are you doing? The whole system really hinges on this K value. The source material defines three main tiers. K equals 1 is algorithmic. Think data entry following a script. K2 is variable, like debugging code in a system you already know. But K3, that's heuristic work, where you're creating something brand new, like designing a system from scratch.
And to make this super concrete, look at some of these real-world examples. In software development, writing documentation might be K equals 1. Fixing bugs is K equals 2. But architectural design, that's K equals 3. For a lawyer, filing a standard form is K equals 1, but putting together a novel trial strategy is K equals 3. The higher your K value, the more devastating the cost of every single distraction.
Okay, let's zoom out, because this is where things get really mind-bending. If this equation is true for one person, what does it mean for a whole company or an entire country? This is where the K equation goes from being a personal productivity tool to a radical macroeconomic theory.
And this all leads to what the author calls the Kim-Tai paradox. And the math here is just undeniable. A nation where people work for 20 hours a week in a state of deep, uninterrupted focus will mathematically outproduce a nation where people work 60 hours a week in a state of constant distraction. Busyness isn't just unproductive, it's a national economic liability.
Now, this isn't just some abstract theory. The source material actually lays out this incredibly ambitious roadmap to basically restructure the global economy. The first phase, starting in 2026, is just to audit and measure the true cost of distraction in our key industries. From there, the plan is to systematically engineer that distraction tax out of our workflows, and critically, to decouple pay from hours worked, because as the equation proves, hours are simply the wrong metric. The ultimate goal? To establish focus as a reportable national asset by 2030.
So the ultimate takeaway here is a really provocative one. We're entering an age where AI is going to handle all the routine, algorithmic tasks. The only true source of human value left is our ability to do deep, complex, creative work. The K equation argues that our future wealth, both as individuals and as a society, won't depend on how we manage our time, but on how fiercely we protect our attention.